All right, we're going to get started. If everyone find a seat, and as others come in, we'll get out more chairs. My name is Marian Krumkowski, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Leelanau County. Welcome to our afternoon presentation here from Flow for the Love of Water. Many of you are League members, but for those of you who are here for the first time, I'll tell you a little bit about the League of Women Voters. We are a nonpartisan political organization that encourages active and informed participation in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and we hope to influence public policy through education and advocacy. We never ever support or oppose candidates or parties. Men and women over the age of 18 who are U.S. citizens are eligible to join the League. We have about 20-25% of our members who are men, so even though the name is League of Women Voters, men and women are encouraged to join.
We're working on changing that.
Good luck, good luck. More information on the League can be found at LWVLC.org. Dues are $60 a year or $90 for a family membership. Membership applications can be found on our brochures, and there's also lots of literature on the tables here. Right. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Liz Kirkwood, but let me say, before I introduce Liz, that at the end of Liz's presentation, we're going to have a short presentation from Tom Van Zoren, who's a ranger at the Sleeping Bear National Park, and he's going to tell us about the remaining opening time in the public comment regarding the homestead sewage issue. So Tom will come up after Liz is done. We are really happy to have Liz Kirkwood with us today. She's the executive director of FLOW, which stands for Love of Water. She has been a leading force in shaping the Oil and Water Don't Mix campaign and regularly presents at conferences throughout the Great Lakes region. Prior to working for FLOW, Liz was an environmental attorney in San Francisco, where she represented clients on a number of natural resource and energy matters. She has also worked in Thailand with USAID as an environmental attorney. She graduated from Williams College with a degree in environmental studies and history, and received her law degree and environmental certificate from Lewis and Clark Law School. Let's give Liz Kirkwood a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marian. It is always a pleasure to come up here at the League of Women Voters. I spoke to a wonderful group down in Kalamazoo about fracking issues in March, or I think it was March, it could have been May. Last time I was up here, gosh, I think it was in the winter time, and that's why I was a little bit late, so my apologies for getting the program a little off track. This is Claire Wood from FLOW. She's our communications and office manager. She can help me with the presentation. So let's start. So Marian asked me to talk to you about the Line 5 pipeline issue, which has become one of the real top environmental issues in our region, well, in Michigan, and then I would say in the Great Lakes region. And before we get there, we're going to talk about a couple of just conceptual things about FLOW. Jim Olson, many of you know him, is our founder, and the idea to form FLOW as an organization really is kind of embodied in Jacques Cousteau's quote that we forget the water cycle and the life cycle are one. And this really embodies what we are about at FLOW. We are trying to get people to start that conversation again, thinking about water as the basis for making all the decisions, thinking about long-term stewardship. And it goes back to this idea about the commons and the notion that is embedded and first really articulated back with the last Roman emperor, Emperor Justinian here, who, even though he was emperor of Rome, he could not fight this innate understanding that we all share common resources like air and water. And imagine Roman fishermen being able to assert and articulate that vision, and that was what was codified in the Roman law, which passed to England and then which passed to American shores. So each of the 50 states is the trustee of these of the public waters and public bottomlands. And so here in the Great Lakes, the eight states and the 2 Canadian provinces have that ongoing, perpetual fiduciary duty to make sure that they're protecting those lands and waters in perpetuity. And of course, we as citizens are beneficiaries. This is actually, I think, in Sutton's Bay last year. So maybe there's a picture of you there. So thanks for doing that. And so there are about 40 million residents who are the beneficiaries of these waters. Next. And because we really lack a word, I think Native people and First Nations would be, they don't like the word asset. So we came up with the word, principal body. So it's the Great Lakes that we're protecting. And to just sum it up in a nutshell, it's the relationship of the public trust to us as citizens. It's identical to that of a banking fiduciary relationship. So the bank is the trustee, you are the beneficiary, and the money, the asset, is what the trustee must protect. So that concept is what the public trust requires. Next. What is very empowering about this doctrine is that it is not a pollution law. It protects both the resource itself of the waters, but it also protects the uses of drinking water, fishing, swimming, navigation, recreation, ecological values. It even has been extended to tributaries that feed into the main water body up in the Mono Lake case back in 1983 in California. Next. So this picture is a mapping project from the Great Lakes Environmental Assessment Mapping Project from the University of Michigan. And what it depicts are 34 different stressors on the Great Lakes. And it's a reminder to us.
Your the microphone's not working.
It's not working. Okay.
Or else you're not close enough.
Is that working?
Nope.
No. Now?
Mm-mm.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And so this image is a reminder that we have a lot of work to do, and in terms of our ability to protect our Great Lakes. This mapping project was looking at everything from climate change to industrial pollution, invasive species, and other perils to our waters. Next. You may remember this. This was back in 2013 when the water levels were about 33 inches down from normal. They have rebounded, but we saw that we basically came out of a 14-year drought. This climate change is affecting these lakes in very, very dramatic ways. About 13 of those 33 inches, many scientists now are attributing to climate change and the evaporation effects that happened because the Great Lakes were not covered with ice as they were in these past 2 years. Next. Invasive species, of course, this looming threat with the big head Asian carp. Next. Pollution issues. Next. The dead zones and nutrient runoff. This is a picture of Lake Erie, the shallowest and warmest of the Great Lakes. 40% of the toxic pollution that has been created is attributed to the runoff in the Maumee watershed. As you may remember, last summer in August, it was for the first 3 days of August, Toledo had to shut down their drinking water supply. Imagine that, an American city not being able to supply almost 500,000 people without clean drinking water. Next. And microplastics is now increasingly becoming a very important issue that affects the entire food chain. Fracking, we can talk about that for a long time as well. We've seen tremendous impact on water resources here in Michigan, using about 4 times the amount of water that we've seen in other areas across the country. It has been very, it's been on the back burner, and but it has revolutionized and changed the energy economy in this country. Next. And finally, here we go. We get to the Line 5 under the straits. So before we talk about Line 5, I think it's really important to understand a larger picture about Enbridge, this Canadian company that owns over 16,000 miles of pipeline. They have extensive plans to invest about $43 billion in the next 3 years to continue to expand their energy products so that these pipelines will go out to the east and to the Gulf and to the west for export. This sort of double red pipeline is known as the Alberta Clipper, from Edmonton, Canada, and coming through Minnesota. That 1,000-mile pipeline, Alberta Clipper, has just doubled in capacity. So behind the story of Keystone XL and the effort to get a presidential permit to transport heavy tar sands into the U.S., behind that whole story, Enbridge has been very steadily, consistently working to expand this existing pipeline to transport these tar sands down to the Great Lakes and then out to the east, the Gulf, and the Pacific as well. Next. So let's just dig down a little into Enbridge Line 5. I think many of you are familiar with this, but I think just a couple of highlights. It's a 645-mile pipeline that originates in Superior, Wisconsin. It traverses the upper UP, crossing many important waterways. Again, once it reaches the straits, it's about 4.6 miles across. It's literally resting on the bottomlands. It is not under. There's no tunnel. And when it was built in 1953, there was just a gravel bed that was created, and it was resting there. At the straits, what is unique is that the pipeline has been split into 2 20-inch pipelines. These pipelines are about almost 2 miles west of the Mackinac Bridge. And right now, every day, 23 million gallons of oil is transported through those pipelines. That is about an 80% increase over the original design, which was 120,000 barrels per day. So let's move on. Thank you. What is very unique about this stretch in the straits themselves is that these pipelines could never have been built except that Enbridge, at that time known as Lakehead Pipeline Company, they secured what's known as a public trust easement from the state of Michigan. So under that relationship, actually what happened, the story is quite extraordinary. Imagine in 2 months, Enbridge was able to get the state of Michigan the legislature to pass Public Act 10 to grant the Department of Conservation at the time legal authority to issue easements on public trust bottomlands so long as they were held in public trust. And so with that duty, of course, as we know, the state of Michigan must ensure that Enbridge never, will not substantially harm, pollute, or destroy the resource. That is their legal duty to us as beneficiaries. This is a very, very complicated and interesting issue because most pipelines are regulated only, or I should say primarily by the federal pipeline agency known as PHMSA. And they are, you're going to make me do the acronym, right? So it's the Pipeline Hazardous Safety Materials Administration. They're under the Department of Transportation, and they are primarily tasked with ensuring safety and maintenance of these pipelines throughout the United States. Now imagine this agency has 151 inspectors to manage 2.6 million miles of hazardous liquid pipelines and natural gas pipelines. It is a tremendous, and really unfair duty for a federal agency to be tasked with. But the reason why this stretch of the pipeline involves the state is because they have the kind of landlord relationship with Enbridge, which is different than the jurisdiction over safety and maintenance. Okay, next. So imagine 62 years, basically. Oh, thank you. Thanks. 60 years goes by. And really nobody in the state of Michigan has been paying attention to taking care of these pipelines. And of course, many of you are very familiar with the Kalamazoo disaster in 2010. This pipeline, known as 6B, is owned also by Enbridge. It took Enbridge 17 hours to respond to this terrible leak that resulted in 1 million gallons going into Talmadge Creek, which is a tributary of the Kalamazoo River. And it really just devastated a 35-mile stretch. It's taken over 5 years, and it cost over $1.2 billion. Next. And it took the courage and the strength of one woman named Beth Wallace from the National Wildlife Federation and a writer named Jeff Alexander. They authored Sunken Hazard back in 2012 to put this issue about the Line 5 pipelines on our radar. NWF then hired some divers to go down and look and investigate these pipelines. And so remember how I told you that it's literally resting on the bottomlands. And you notice that it's impossible to actually do a visual inspection of that pipeline because it's encrusted with invasive mussels. Now, National Wildlife Federation thought these were broken supports. Well, our engineers have been looking at this issue, and they actually believe that they are wooden slats that surrounded the pipelines that have broken off. And that's a specific engineering requirement of the easement because it provided that extra protection from the friction as the pipelines would move laterally across the bottomlands. Next. Last summer, Dr. David Schwab from the University of Michigan did an incredible oil simulation that I'm going to show with you, if you will bear with me, in the next slide. If Claire, if you can just, go to the next one. And then there's going to be a little arrow. So what he did, I will just explain if we cannot get this going on, but he was able to look at the movement of how oil would move in the currents. He said it was one of the worst possible places, and that's because the currents are 10 times more powerful than Niagara Falls.
Wow.
This is an area that just changes current regularly. So for a couple days, it may cut across from the east to the west, and then it may reverse. And then remember, the water is about 250 feet deep, and so what happens at the top of the column, the middle part of the column, and the bottom of the column is very different. This is 1 million gallons that spreads over 20 days. The yellow is the middle of the depth, the blue is at the very bottom, and the red is at the top. And so you'll see here's Mackinac Island completely surrounded by oil. They would have no ferry service, no drinking water. service. We've spoken to the water manager up there. It could take 6 weeks to get the membrane for their water treatment system to restart because they have to go all the way, they have to get it shipped from Australia. The impact would be from Beaver Island in Lake Michigan to Rogers City in Lake Huron. So we're at 15 days, we're at 16 days. And you can imagine what it would do to northern Michigan and the Pure Michigan whole logo and, right? Okay, so now imagine we're here during the winter months and we now have testimony from the U.S. Coast Guard, and they're the first responders, that there would be they've testified before Congress. They're uncomfortable with their ability to actually clean it up. They've documented it in other reports. 2 weeks ago on September 24th, Enbridge and over, I think there was 300 local, state, and federal responders who were simulating an oil spill. And during that moment when they had everybody on site, they were only able to capture 30% of that oil that they were, simulating of an oil spill. Imagine what it would be like in the winter months. Flow has been working with a number of groups, and I see June here from MEMEAC and lots of good friends. Groundwork Center, Sierra Club, Michigan Environmental Council, many others, Food and Water Watch. We've come together to make sure that we're protecting our Great Lakes. And so our goal is to make sure that there's no oil in, on, or under the Great Lakes. And given we have limited information, but we have enough information to start to make the assertion that we don't believe it is safe at this point to transport the oil in this pipeline through the straits, given the location. It is just too extraordinary a disaster to happen. Okay, next. Oh, sorry, can we move back there? I just want to mention there are over 150 businesses who have now signed on to support this campaign. We have had a number of mayors from Traverse City. We had the mayor of Mackinac Island, mayor of Grand Rapids, writing to Governor Snyder opposing this pipeline. Well, actually, at that point, we were asking him just to exercise his legal duty under the public trust. And now we're going further to say stopping the flow of oil given the imminent harm and risk. We have contributed to this process in several ways. We've convened a number of really extraordinary technical team, a couple of former Dow chemical engineers, a hazardous risk management specialist with White House clearance, and others. And we put out a report in April, and then we just put out another report in September that really underscores the imminence of this and the urgency for the state to actually take immediate action while we start investigating other alternatives. But we're very proud because as a result of our input, we really helped to influence the task force report. Go to the next, which came out in July. There were 13 different recommendations, but there were 4 that were specific to the straits. The first one was to actually ban heavy crude oil in the Straits pipeline. There is an agreement between the state of Michigan and Enbridge now to ban it. But if as a lawyer, you can't help, you gotta read every every word, right? And when you get to the end of the document, it actually allows Enbridge to go to a court if they decided they wanted to transport heavy tar sands through the pipeline. So there is an out for Enbridge. It is not a total ban. The two critical points in the task force report, which, you know, to the credit of the state, they spent a long time and they did a very good job really thinking about this issue, listening, and they did not buy Enbridge's arguments. They thought it was unreasonable to imagine that these pipelines could last forever. But the task force said that we needed to have an independent risk analysis, financial assurances, but the real key is let's look at alternatives. Just exploring the status quo and just hearing Enbridge explain that it's safe and they have state-of-the-art technology, that wasn't enough for the state. And they also, of course, are demanding more information. Okay, next. Where we felt a little bit empty was there were no action plans, no timelines in that July piece. Then we heard from he wants to be governor, Attorney General Bill Schuette. And because he does want to be governor, that's very significant. So he came out with this statement: "You would not build a Straits pipeline in this decade. I'm doubtful it will be open in future decades. Its days are numbered. Its duration is limited, in my opinion." Now, when we all heard this, we thought, wow, this is extraordinary. But keep remembering this. But then we heard from Brad Werfel, the communications director at DEQ. At the end of the day, any mode of transport for petroleum products has some measure of risk. Although the Attorney General says the pipeline's days are numbered, it could be a huge number. Okay, so I don't have my other slide in there for John Stewart, but anyway, yeah, you know what he would say, but let's keep on moving. So, September 3rd, Governor Snyder then finally appointed this Pipeline Safety Advisory board. We have we have some good colleagues who are on this board, including National Wildlife Federation and Tip of the Mitt. And we also, Chris Shepler from Shepler's Ferry is on there, and we think that's wonderful to have, you know, a key business interest who would be dramatically affected by a catastrophic spill. They are meeting on October 28th, and of course their charge is to implement the recommendations of the task force. We still don't have any, the Great Lakes are no safer today. There's not one measure that's been imposed on Enbridge, and that is the issue. And so we are continuing to pressure the state and the Attorney General's office because they have separate legal authority to do something about this issue. Now, 2 weeks ago, it's hard to remember all these things. Every day I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to update this presentation.